Hey everyone, welcome back to the Military History Channel, your go-to place for clear, sharp insights into military concepts and strategies. Today, we're diving deeper into our series on the evolution of operational art. In this video, we begin Chapter 2, Prussian-German Operational Art, one of the most influential periods in military thinking. To make it super easy to follow, we've broken down the chapter into 11 carefully selected questions. These questions will help you understand the entire chapter step by step, no jargon, no confusion. And if you'd like a PDF version of this chapter in question and answer format, just reach out to us. Special update for 2025 to 26 aspirants. We've also put together a highly focused question bank, crafted specifically for the DSSC and pre-staff exams. Guess what? Questions from our bank have already appeared in previous papers. So don't wait. Get your hands on it at a very affordable rate and give your prep a serious boost. Let's get started with Chapter 2 and unlock the secrets behind Prussian-German operational art. Let's move to question number 1, which states, discuss the evolution of the German approach to war in comparison to the scientific and managerial traditions of the Soviet Union and the United States. In your answer, highlight the meaning and application of Fingerspitzengefühl and Tuchfühlung, the influence of Prussia's geopolitical constraints on its military philosophy, the institutional traits this artistic approach fostered. Alright friends, let's begin with our first question. What was the German approach to operational art? Germany, or more specifically Prussia, had a very unique way of looking at war. They didn't treat it like a set of rules or a fixed formula. They saw war as an art form. To them, war was something that required deep study, reflection, and most importantly, an intuitive feel for fast-changing battlefield situations. In other words, a commander had to understand the flow of war, not just follow instructions. Now let's quickly compare this with how other major powers saw war. The Soviets, for example, followed a scientific approach. They believed war operated under certain laws. It could be predicted using ideology and principles, especially those based on Marxism-Leninism. On the other hand, the United States followed a more managerial approach. For them, war was all about planning, logistics, organizing resources, and running things efficiently, kind of like managing a massive company during wartime. So, while the Soviets saw war as a science, and the Americans saw it as management, the Germans saw it as an art, something creative, flexible, and driven by human instinct and experience. Now let's move to the second part of our first question. What do the German terms Fingerspitzengefühl and Tuchfühlung mean? And how are they applied in operational art? These two concepts are at the heart of how the German military thought and operated on the battlefield. First, we have Fingerspitzengefühl. Literally translated, it means fingertip feel. But in military terms, it means something deeper. It's about having an intuitive, almost instinctive understanding of what's happening on the battlefield. A commander with Fingerspitzengefühl doesn't need long reports or maps. He can just feel the pulse of the battle and react instantly. Then comes Tuchfühlung, which means sense of touch. This is about staying closely connected to the action, maintaining direct contact with how events are unfolding on the ground. Now here's the magic. When you combine these two, Fingerspitzengefühl and Tuchfühlung, you get a commander who's not just aware of the situation, but one who can sense, feel, and react to it in real time with speed, daring, and instinct. It's not just situational awareness. It's living inside the battle, feeling every move, and adapting instantly to seize the advantage. This, my friends, was a major part of what made German operational art so deadly and effective. Let's now explore the third part of this question. How did Prussia's geography and geopolitical situation influence its way of fighting wars? So here's the reality. Prussia was stuck in the middle of Europe, surrounded by powerful countries on all sides. It had no natural defenses like oceans or mountains to protect it. and it didn't have rich resources to sustain long wars. This dangerous position forced Prussia to think differently. They couldn't afford to get dragged into long, costly wars. They just didn't have the luxury. So what did they do? They developed a strategy based on speed and precision. This meant keeping the military always ready, what we call forward-loaded readiness, avoiding long campaigns at all costs, and putting massive emphasis on winning fast and winning big with strong, decisive victories right at the beginning of a war. In simple terms, Prussia had to hit first, hit hard, and end it quickly. Their very survival depended on it. And that pressure shaped the entire German approach to war, focused, sharp, and lightning fast. Now let's break down the final part. What kind of military system and culture did Germany develop because of this artistic approach to war? The German way of war wasn't just about philosophy. They actually built institutions and training systems around it. Let's look at what that included. Flexible command systems. German commanders were trained to adapt quickly as battlefield conditions changed. They didn't wait for orders. They were empowered to act on their own when needed. Aggressiveness and initiative were not just encouraged, they were expected. Officers were trained to be bold, to take charge, and to think independently. There was a shared military ethos, a common mindset across all ranks. From the generals down to junior officers, everyone focused on decisive action and adaptability. And how is all this built? Through rigorous training and annual maneuvers. Exercises that were designed to mimic real stress, unexpected surprises, and pressure-filled situations. Officers had to learn how to improvise and make quick decisions under fire, just like they would in a real war. So in short, the German military didn't just talk about war as an art. They trained their people to live it with speed, instinct, and relentless focus on victory. Moving on to next question, that is question to which states analyze the impact of Frederick the Great's military leadership on the early Prussian way of war. Comment on his emphasis on time, surprise, and tactical primacy. The role of annual maneuvers and military-state integration. The limitations his approach faced during the 7 Years' War. Now let us try to understand this concept. Let's break down how Frederick the Great changed early Prussian warfare with his bold military leadership and what impact it really had. 1. Time, surprise, and tactical focus. Frederick the Great believed speed and surprise were the keys to victory. He didn't waste time with long planning or scouting. Instead, he focused on fast, aggressive attacks to win battles quickly. For him, time was the most valuable thing in war. He wanted to strike before the enemy could even react. 2. Annual maneuvers and state military integration. After the Silesian Wars, Frederick made sure that the state and the military worked closely together. He shaped the economy to support the army. And every year, he ran big training exercises called maneuvers, where soldiers and leaders were tested under pressure. This helped create a strong, professional army that was always ready to fight. 3. Strategic limitations in the 7 Years' War. But things didn't always go smoothly. In the long and difficult 7 Years' War, his quick attack style started to show its limits. Prussia was fighting on many fronts and began losing resources fast. Even though Frederick won some battles, they didn't always lead to real progress. By the end of the war, Prussia was tired, weakened, and facing serious problems at home. So yes, Frederick's leadership brought big changes. But it also showed that even smart strategies have limits, especially in a long, tough war. Now moving on to question 3. Which states, question 3, with reference to the period 1806 to 1815, answer the following. A. Why did the Prussian army of the Wars of Liberation fail to develop coherent operational art? B. What tactical characteristics did it adopt in response to Napoleonic warfare, and how effective were they? Dosto, from 1806 to 1815, European armies were fighting huge wars. But why couldn't they come up with a solid, organized strategy to win? Let's find out why military planning during this time fell apart. 1. Tactical regression after 1806. After 1806, armies, especially Prussia's, started falling back into old habits. They focused too much on small, tactical moves without any big picture planning. This lack of strategy led to major defeats like at Jena Austerlitz, where poor planning cost them the battle. 2. Coalition problems during the Wars of Liberation. Now, when different countries teamed up to fight Napoleon, things didn't get much better. Allies didn't fully trust each other, and their coordination was weak. Planning was all over the place. Staff work was poor, and strategies weren't connected. Leaders like Blücher often made decisions based on emotion, not logic or long-term goals. 3. Limited operational success. There were some big wins, like Waterloo. But these victories weren't because of smart, well-planned operations. They were mostly the result of quick decisions and good tactics in the moment, led by the coalition forces. In short, no real operational art, just battlefield luck and teamwork under pressure. So, between weak planning, emotional leadership, and poor teamwork among allies, armies during this time just couldn't pull off a strong, unified war strategy. That's why, even with victories, their operations were often a mess. Moving on to second part. So friends, in the last part, we saw how poor strategy held back armies during the Napoleonic Wars. Now let's zoom in on the actual tactics they used and why they didn't always work. Massed firepower and focus on attrition. Instead of smart, decisive moves, most armies relied on brute force. They used massed firepower, basically huge lines of troops firing non-stop to wear the enemy down. They also used small, mobile groups to test weak spots in enemy lines. But overall, it wasn't about winning fast, it was about surviving longer. 2. Training and structure limits. These tactics were okay for fighting smaller states, but not for going up against big powers like Napoleon's France. Sure, the soldiers had high morale. They were brave and ready to fight. But the real problem? Poor coordination. Even when they broke through enemy lines, they didn't know how to follow up and turn those gains into real victories. 3. The outcome. The result? Even when they won battles, those wins didn't lead to real progress. Why? Because there was no connection between their tactics and a bigger strategy. And without that, they simply couldn't match the depth and planning that Napoleon brought to the battlefield. So while their tactics looked powerful on the surface, they lacked the coordination and planning needed to actually win the war. And that's why they kept falling short, no matter how hard they fought. Moving to the next question. That is question 4, which states, evaluate Helmuth von Moltke's contributions to the emergence of operational art in the Prussian army. Your answer should cover Moltke's response to firepower, railways, and army size. The distinction between tactical envelopment and operational level planning. His use of decentralized corps movements and the lessons of Königgrätz. So friends, have you ever wondered how Prussia went from messy, old-fashioned battle tactics to modern, organized warfare? The answer lies in one brilliant mind, Helmuth von Moltke. He was the mastermind who completely changed how wars were planned and fought. Moltke understood that war was evolving. Guns were becoming more deadly, armies were growing larger, and railways had arrived, making fast movement possible like never before. He used trains to move huge numbers of soldiers quickly, which changed the speed and scale of military operations. He also realized that stronger firepower made defense more powerful than ever, so attacking had to be smarter. To deal with this, Moltke focused on better planning, smarter logistics, and building command systems that could support large campaigns across big areas. Before Moltke, most military thinking was all about winning battles through clever moves during the fight, like surprise attacks or flanking the enemy. But Moltke thought bigger than that. He planned where armies should be even before a battle started. He focused on when and where to move troops and how to bring forces together at just the right time. He also made a clear difference between strategy, choosing where to place your army at the start, and operations, deciding how they move and act once the war begins. Moltke also believed that not everything should be controlled from the top. He let different army units move independently, as long as they all worked toward the same goal. This idea proved successful at the Battle of Königgrätz, where Prussia used several separate armies to surround and defeat the enemy in one big, coordinated attack. In 1869, he made this system official, and from then on, the main goal of war became total destruction of the enemy force. In the end, Moltke's ideas helped transform Prussia from using outdated battle tactics to becoming a leader in modern warfare. His approach to operational planning laid the foundation for how many future wars would be fought, and his influence is still seen in military strategies even today. Now moving on to next question, that is question 5, which states operational art emerged in Prussia as a response to structural and strategic constraints, not as a natural progression of tactical excellence. Critically assess this statement with examples from Moltke's campaigns of 1866 and 1870, Prussian strategic objectives and force limitations, the balance between tactical improvisation and theater-level design. Let us answer this question. Dosto, was Prussia's brilliant war planning just military genius, or was it born out of necessity? To answer that, let's look at how Prussia's way of fighting wars wasn't just smart, it was a survival strategy. Prussia wasn't a huge empire with endless troops and money. It was a smaller power surrounded by bigger enemies. That meant it couldn't afford long, drawn-out wars. Instead, it had to win fast and decisively. These limitations actually pushed Prussia to get creative. They relied on speed, precision, and careful planning, like using railways to move troops quickly and coordinating attacks tightly. A great example of this was the war against Austria in 1866, where Prussia's speed and planning helped defeat a larger army. Moltke's campaigns became perfect examples of this kind of smart planning. In 1866, he sent separate army groups moving on their own, but all heading toward one goal, meeting at Königgrätz for a powerful surround attack. Then, in 1870, during the war with France, he used railways on a massive scale to move troops fast and flexibly. This led to the famous encirclement of the French army at Sedan. These victories weren't just about what happened on the battlefield. They were planned out across the entire war zone from the very beginning. Moltke believed that strategy should always come first. Tactics, the moves made during battle, were important, but only if they served a bigger plan. He gave his commanders freedom to make decisions on the ground, but always within a clear framework. That's why Prussian victories didn't happen by luck. They were carefully designed ahead of time, with each piece fitting into the overall strategy. In the end, Prussia's operational art wasn't just a natural step forward. It was shaped by the need to survive in a tough neighborhood. Moltke turned challenges into advantages. By using railways, decentralized command, and clear coordination, he made sure every move fit into a larger plan. That's what made Prussian warfare so effective, always putting strategy before tactics. And if you're enjoying this series on Prussian warfare and military transformation, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now let us move to next question. Question 6, which states, examine how Alfred von Schlieffen conceptualized total battle and how his theories differed from Moltke's operational thought. Comment on his integration of strategy, operations, and tactics, the Schlieffen plan's assumptions and intended tempo, the consequences of rigidity and absence of friction tolerance in 1914. Dosto, after Moltke changed the way wars were planned and fought, another key figure rose in Prussian military history, Alfred von Schlieffen. He had one big idea: to create a war plan that brought everything, strategy, operations, and tactics under one unified vision. Let's take a closer look at his bold plan and why things didn't go the way he hoped. Schlieffen came up with the idea of Gesamtschlacht, or total battle. He didn't want just clever battlefield moves or good coordination. He wanted a complete plan where everything was connected from the start of the war to its end. From the moment soldiers were mobilized, every step was supposed to follow a clear, straight path to victory. This was very different from Moltke's flexible style. Schlieffen believed in detailed planning and constant forward momentum, with no room for stopping or slowing down. This big idea led to the creation of the Schlieffen Plan, a famous strategy designed to help Germany win a war onto France. The goal was to quickly defeat France in the west, then turn and face Russia in the east. The plan was based on the belief that France was weak in the north, so German troops would swing through neutral Belgium and attack France from behind. Every part of the plan was timed perfectly, like clockwork. Schlieffen believed the entire war could be over in just 6 to 9 months. But in 1914, when World War I began and the plan was put into action, it started to fall apart. The Schlieffen Plan was too rigid. It couldn't adapt to delays or surprises. There were no backup troops if something went wrong. Belgium resisted harder than expected. Britain joined the war to defend Belgium, and German supply lines became a huge problem. Instead of a quick win, the war turned into a long, bloody stalemate. Trench warfare took over, and Europe faced a nightmare that would last for years. In the end, Schlieffen's plan was bold, detailed, and ambitious, but it couldn't handle the chaos of real war. Total planning without flexibility turned into total failure. Moving next to question number 7, which states, what operational lessons can be drawn from the German campaigns of World War I? Focus your answer on successes and limits of stormtroop tactics and artillery evolution, the absence of true exploitation forces and failed pursuit operations, organizational and technological gaps in translating tactical gains into strategic outcomes. Dosto, World War I forced armies into a new kind of warfare, but not everyone kept up with the change. Let's look at what Germany tried during the war, what worked on the battlefield, and where things fell apart at the operational level. To break the deadlock of trench warfare, Germany introduced new ideas. They developed stormtroop tactics, where small, fast-moving units called stormtroopers were trained to sneak past enemy strong points instead of attacking directly. Along with this, they upgraded their artillery. Instead of large, random bombardments, they used focused and accurate shelling to take out key enemy positions. These changes worked well tactically. But there was a big problem. Even when Germany broke through enemy lines, they had no way to keep the attack going. The troops were exhausted, reinforcements were slow, and there was no clear plan for what came after the breakthrough. One of the biggest weaknesses was the lack of follow-up forces. Germany didn't have mobile units ready to take advantage of any breakthrough. Their cavalry was outdated and useless in the muddy, broken terrain of trench warfare. So, once the infantry broke through, they had to stop and wait, giving the Allies time to recover and push back. This became clear during the spring offensives of 1918, where Germany made good progress at first, but couldn't keep the momentum. Without speed or support, all those early gains were lost. On top of that, Germany faced organizational and technological problems. Their artillery was strong but very hard to move. They lacked trucks and other motor vehicles, and had barely any tanks of their own. Most were captured from the enemy. Worst of all, even when they won a local battle, it didn't lead to anything bigger. There was no clear plan or doctrine to turn small wins into major strategic success. So, what's the big lesson? Germany had clever battlefield tactics, but no strong plan for long-term victory. Without mobile forces, reinforcements, and a clear operational goal, even their best attacks couldn't turn the tide of the war. Let us move to question 8, which states, contrast German operational thinking on the Eastern and Western fronts during World War I. Include in your response the nature of German successes at Gorlice, Tarnow, and Riga, differences in geography, enemy resilience, and pursuit capability, how these campaigns reflected or challenged existing operational doctrine? Let us answer this question part-wise. First part. Dosto, when we think about World War I, the first image that usually comes to mind is the muddy trenches of the Western Front. But Germany's military thinking and their results looked quite different on the Eastern Front. Let's take a look at how German operational planning played out in the East, starting with some of their biggest victories. One of the most successful operations was the Gorlice-Tarnow offensive in 1915. This was a joint effort between Germany and Austria-Hungary, and it showed just how powerful detailed planning and heavy artillery could be when used together. They managed to break through Russian lines in Poland and captured around 300,000 Russian soldiers. This wasn't just a lucky win, it was a moment where strategy, logistics, and battlefield execution all came together perfectly. It was a true high point for German operational thinking. Another important moment came in 1917 at Riga, in present-day Latvia. Germany launched a well-organized attack right after the Russian Revolution, hitting a weakened and disorganized Russian force. It was a clean, tactical victory. But there's a catch. By then, Russia was already falling apart politically and militarily. So while the win looked good on paper, it didn't really test Germany's ability to handle a tough, well-prepared opponent. It didn't say much about long-term strategic planning either. Dosto, in part 1, we looked at how Germany pulled off some major operational victories on the Eastern Front during World War I. But what made the East so different from the brutal, bloody fighting in the West? Let's break down the key differences that shaped Germany's strategy and also showed where it fell short. On the Eastern Front, Germany had a lot more space to move. The terrain was wide and open, and the front lines stretched across huge distances. This made maneuver warfare possible, where armies could move around, outflank the enemy, and use speed to win battles. Russian forces, on the other hand, were often poorly supplied and slower to respond. So when Germany broke through, it had a big impact. But there was one big problem. Germany's logistics couldn't keep up. The terrain was so vast that they struggled to supply and move their troops fast enough after a victory. So even though the space was there, they couldn't fully take advantage of it. Now, the Western Front was a completely different challenge. The terrain was much more cramped and fortified. It was full of trenches, bunkers, and barbed wire, making it ideal for defense and extremely tough for attackers. The Allies, especially Britain and France, had strong supply systems, fast-moving reserves, and could bounce back from losses quickly. Even when Germany managed to break through, they couldn't hold on to the momentum. Most offensives would stall within days and turn into long, painful battles where both sides were just trying to wear each other down. On the Eastern Front, Germany had room to move, but not the means to finish the job. On the Western Front, they had better tools, but no space to use them. These two very different battlefields exposed the limits of Germany's operational planning and showed how even the smart-ass strategies can hit a wall when the environment doesn't cooperate. Dosto, we've looked at Germany's campaigns on both the Eastern and Western fronts during World War I. But now comes the big question. What did they actually learn from all of it? And more importantly, how did those experiences shape German military thinking the years that followed? On the Eastern Front, Germany showed that it had serious potential. Operations like the Gorlice-Tarnow offensive were great examples of what well-planned, coordinated action could achieve. The timing, execution, and teamwork were all on point. But here's the issue. These victories didn't leave a lasting impact. Why? Because the Russian army was already falling apart, disorganized, poorly supplied, and breaking down from within. So even though Germany pulled off impressive campaigns, they were often dismissed as wins against a weak enemy, not as real tests of German skill. As a result, they didn't play a major role in shaping future doctrine. The Western Front, on the other hand, was a completely different experience, and one that left a much deeper mark. It exposed the limits of German strategy. On the tactical level, German troops were skilled and creative, but they had no strategic follow-through. Every time they broke through enemy lines, the attack would quickly stall. They lacked the mobility, backup, and planning needed to turn a victory into something bigger. These hard lessons taught Germany what it was really missing: operational depth, the ability to keep pushing after the first success. Mechanization, vehicles and tanks to move fast across tough terrain. Mobility, forces that could keep up the momentum and adapt to the situation. By the end of the war in 1918, Germany still didn't have these key elements in place. Microphone, so to sum it up. The East showed what Germany could do, but the West showed what Germany needed to learn. And it was those tough lessons from the Western Front about mobility, coordination, and long-term planning that would shape Germany's military doctrine in the years between the two world wars. Thanks for sticking with us through this deep dive into German operational thinking. If you're learning something new from this series, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now let us move to question number 9, which states, explain the interplay between political-military relations and operational planning in Prussian-German military history. Use examples from Moltke's distinction between political objectives and military execution. Bismarck and Moltke's dynamic during the Franco-Prussian War. Post-1871 shifts toward military dominance in policy and planning. Dosto, to answer the big question, who decides how a country goes to war? The politicians or the generals? We need to understand how this balance worked in Germany. The truth is, in Germany's case, the line between politics and military planning was always complicated. Let's take a closer look at how these two sides interacted and sometimes clashed in shaping how Germany went to war. Helmuth von Moltke, one of Germany's top military minds, had a very clear approach. He believed that politicians should decide why a war is being fought. That's the goal. But once the war started, it was up to the military to figure out how to win it. This idea became official in the Instructions for Higher Commanders, a document that laid out a strict separation between political decisions and military operations. In theory, everyone had their role. Politicians handled diplomacy, while the army handled the battlefield. At first, this division seemed to work, especially during the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. Both Bismarck, the Chancellor, and Moltke wanted a fast, decisive war. But after the big win at Sedan, things got tense. Moltke wanted to keep going and crush France completely. Bismarck, however, thought Germany should make peace while they were ahead. This disagreement, especially about whether to march on Paris, highlighted how military and political goals could clash, even when both sides wanted victory. After Germany's unification in 1871, things shifted. The army gained more and more power, and the general staff became almost like a government of its own. Military planning started happening with little to no input from civilian leaders. This is how ideas like the Schlieffen plan came to life, plans created almost entirely by generals, with diplomacy left out of the conversation. The result was a rigid, military-first approach to war. Political flexibility and negotiation took a back seat, replaced by strict military logic. So, what's the takeaway? In theory, politics and the military were supposed to stay in their own lanes. But over time, Germany's military started steering the entire car. This shift had major consequences for how wars were planned and how they were fought on the ground. Now moving to next question, that is question 10, which states, evaluate the contributions of Hans von Seeckt to the recovery of the German military tradition after World War I. In your answer, consider the doctrinal innovations of the Reichswehr, Seeckt's approach to mechanization and initiative, constraints imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. Dosto, after the disaster of World War I, Germany's army was left broken, limited by harsh treaties, and stripped of much of its power. But while it looked like the German military was finished, something very important was happening behind the scenes, a quiet revolution led by one man, Hans von Seeckt. Let's explore how his bold ideas helped reshape German military thinking and laid the foundation for what would eventually become modern warfare. Seeckt looked back at World War I and made one thing clear: never again to the slow, bloody, and static trench warfare that had drained Germany. He rejected the idea of mass armies stuck in defensive positions. Instead, he believed the future of war was all about mobility, speed, and smart decision-making. Even if Germany was outnumbered, he thought a fast-moving, well-led force could still win. During the 1920s, German military training and manuals began to focus on offense, movement, and flexibility, what would later be called Bewegungskrieg, or the War of Movement. But Seeckt didn't stop at ideas. He also saw the importance of technology and leadership. He pushed for mechanization, knowing that vehicles would play a key role in future battles. Even though Germany was limited by the Treaty of Versailles, he made sure his small army trained like a modern one. They used motorized units, held large training exercises, and even practiced with mock tanks to prepare for high-speed combat. More importantly, he reshaped the way German officers thought and operated. Young commanders were trained to take initiative, make decisions on the spot, and lead small, flexible units with confidence. It wasn't just about machines, it was about a mindset where speed, independence, and smart leadership turned a small force into a powerful one. So, what's the big takeaway? Seeckt's reforms took a weakened, limited army and gave it a new purpose and direction. He planted the seeds for a faster, smarter way of fighting, a style of warfare that would later explode onto the world stage as Blitzkrieg. Moving to next part. Dosto, another huge challenge Seeckt faced was the Treaty of Versailles. Germany's army was limited to just 100,000 troops, and they weren't allowed to have tanks, aircraft, or heavy artillery. But instead of pushing back and risking more punishment, Seeckt took a careful approach. He avoided any moves that might provoke the Allies and instead focused on quality over quantity. Since they couldn't train with real tanks or planes, the army got creative, using simulations, mock equipment, and large-scale exercises to keep modern tactics alive. Despite the restrictions, the doctrine kept evolving, staying sharp and forward-looking. The long-term impact of Seeckt's work was huge. His reforms laid the intellectual and tactical foundation for what would later become Blitzkrieg, the fast, mobile, and overwhelming style of warfare used in World War II. The panzer divisions, mechanized infantry, and operational flexibility of the German army in the 1930s and 1940s all traced back to ideas developed under Seeckt's leadership. The Reichswehr, the small army of the interwar years, became the bridge from the slow, static warfare of World War I to the fast-paced mobility of World War II. Now moving on to last and final question of this chapter, question 11, which states, in what ways did Operation Barbarossa mark the end of German operational art as a viable concept? Include reference to strategic incoherence and logistical challenges, the failure to adapt mobile forces to the Soviet theater, the conflation of military, political, and ideological objectives. Dosto, Operation Barbarossa was Germany's boldest military move, an all-out invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. It was supposed to be another lightning-fast campaign, a quick victory like in France. But instead, it turned into one of the most brutal and costly failures of the war. So, what went wrong? Let's break down how German operational planning fell apart on the Eastern Front. Right from the start, there was no clear strategic goal. The Germans couldn't agree on what the main target was: Moscow, Leningrad, or Ukraine. Political, military, economic, and even ideological goals all pulled in different directions. This confusion led to the army being split into 3 separate offensives, stretching their forces thin and weakening their focus. Then came the logistics nightmare. The roads in the Soviet Union were in terrible condition, and the railway system didn't match Germany's, so trains couldn't run efficiently. Supplies, fuel, and spare parts couldn't keep up with the front lines. What was supposed to be a fast-moving campaign slowed to a crawl. The farther German forces pushed, the worse their supply problems got. They lost their mobility, which was their biggest advantage. Another big issue was that Blitzkrieg just didn't fit the Soviet battlefield. German doctrine was built around speed, tanks, and surprise. But the huge distances, harsh terrain, and later, the brutal winter, made that kind of warfare almost impossible. The Soviet Union also had its own military doctrine called deep battle, which let them take a hit, regroup, and then strike back hard. Yes, Germany won early battles at places like Minsk and Kiev, but they couldn't turn those into long-term victories. The Red Army kept coming back stronger. So, what's the bottom line? Even though Germany won several tactical battles, they couldn't turn them into real success. Operation Barbarossa revealed the limits of German operational art. Speed and firepower weren't enough to overcome the Soviet Union's depth, resilience, and massive geography. Dosto, in part 1, we saw how poor planning and stretched logistics slowed Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union to a crawl. But behind all the tactical and logistical failures, there was another, deeper issue: ideology. And in many ways, it was the final nail in the coffin for Operation Barbarossa. What started as a military campaign quickly became a racial ideological war. The Nazis weren't just trying to win battles. They had bigger, darker goals. The SS enforced brutal occupation policies, targeting civilians and committing mass atrocities. German army resources were pulled away from combat to support repression and control. Instead of winning hearts and minds, they fueled local resistance, especially in places like Ukraine and Belarus, where people had initially hoped for liberation from Soviet rule. Now, they were fighting back, hard. And then there was Hitler. His constant interference in military operations made things worse. He ignored his generals, refused to allow retreats, and made key decisions based on ideology instead of strategy. The core strengths of German operational art, flexibility, initiative, and smart delegation were slowly destroyed. Commanders could no longer adapt to the situation on the ground. Instead of strategy driving the war, ideology took control, and chaos followed. So what did Barbarossa reveal? It exposed the limits of Germany's operational system. The tools that had worked so well in places like Poland and France, speed, surprise, and mobility, simply didn't fit the massive scale, fierce resistance, and complex politics of the Eastern Front. What was supposed to be another quick, clean campaign turned into a long, brutal collapse. In the end, it wasn't just the harsh weather, the vast terrain, or Soviet numbers that defeated Germany. It was a dangerous mix of overconfidence, poor planning, and a toxic ideology that undermined their own military strategy from within. Dosto, and with that, we come to the end of this part of the series. I hope you now have a clear understanding of how German operational art evolved from its early successes to its eventual breakdown, especially during Operation Barbarossa. We've seen how strategy, logistics, terrain, and ideology all played a role in shaping and unraveling Germany's approach to war. And here's some good news for you. We've put together a PDF that brings everything together in one place. It includes all the question and answer sets we've covered so far. 1. A detailed section on the 1947-48 war. 2. A short, crisp biography of Field Marshal K. M. Cariappa. 3. And an in-depth explanation of operational art, perfect for revision or deeper study. Special bonus for Part D aspirants. If you're preparing for Part D, we've also launched a special PDF with 72 important questions to help you study smart and stay ahead of the curve. So don't miss out. Grab your copy and make your preparation more focused and effective. Final call to action. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more value-packed content coming your way, so stay tuned and keep learning. Your support keeps this series going strong.